In previous videos for teaching your kids to sew, we've been working with felt and embroidery thread with a large needle to create things like the little mouse and the dinosaur and bunting and things like that. So in this video we're moving on from felt and we're going to look at cotton and we're going to make a tissue packet cover. It's still sewn by hand. It's a very, very simple project, but I want to explain to them the difference between felt and cotton, what a seam is, how cotton frays, how we can stop it fraying, and the difference between scissors and pinking shears. So if you'd like to be involved, I'd suggest, you know your kids better than anybody, whether you need to cut things out or they can cut things out, and obviously any child with a needle needs to be supervised, that's entirely up to you. But I just think that they'll find this a really quick and simple project to make and something that they can use, or they could make for you, or they could make as a gift for somebody else as well. So your materials that you need will be on your screen in just a second, and then let's get sewing. Do you remember with the projects that we made before, we were working with felt? So this is felt fabric, and you used thick thread with a big needle, and you made a running stitch, you made a cross stitch, you did an over edge stitch, and we did little French knots. It's going to be a little bit different sewing with cotton. So first of all, let me show you what the difference is. So this is felt, it's quite thick, it's very soft, and it doesn't fray. So like with my dinosaur, you can see all the edge of the felt there, and it's not going to fray. Now if we made that out of cotton, which we're going to use now, cotton's a finer fabric and it's woven so it has thread going this way and thread going this way, and it will fray. So if I just pull the edges here, you can see those threads come away. Now that means if I'd have made my dinosaur or my mouse out of cotton fabric, then I'd need to do something to stop these edges from fraying. And what we're going to do with the project today is an over edge stitch. So just like you did on the little mouse, you go over and over and over and over, and that can help to stop the fabric from fraying. There are other ways of doing it, and we'll look at those in future videos. Now the needle and thread that you used before was quite a thick needle with a big eye, and you used really thick thread so that it stood out. Because I'm sewing with cotton this time, I'm going to use a thinner needle, and I'm also going to use thinner thread. So let's put the thread in the needle first of all. Don't make it too long, else it'll go all knotty as you're sewing it. So let's cut a piece of that. And then this, just like before, is going to go through the hole in the end of the needle. Can you remember what that's called? So pull the thread all the way through, but not off the end of the needle. And do you remember how to tie a knot? With the end of the thread pointing to the point of the needle, grab hold of it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold on to the ties and pull. And there's your nice little knot at the end of your thread. Now to make our tissue box cover, you're going to have 3 pieces of fabric measuring 6 inches by 4 inches. So 2 patterned and 1 plain. And then there's 2 pieces of plain fabric, which are squares, and those measure 4 inches square. And you can see already I've folded the squares in half and I've ironed them in half and ironed it. And then the 2 pattern long pieces, they're folded in half and they're ironed, fold in half and ironed like that. Then we're going to arrange them on here. So this is the fold. These are called raw edges. So these are all of the edges that could fray. So I want the raw edge to meet the raw edge here. And these edges all line up as well. Then we'll have one of the smaller pieces and we'll put that on top at the side. Then another long piece, we'll put that on top here. And then the final piece, and remember I'm raw edge to raw edge with the folded ends in the middle. I'm going to put on here, hold it down there, lift that up and just tuck it underneath the first piece, like that. Now I'm going to put some pins in here to hold it all in place. I like to use big long pins so I can see them if I drop them on the floor. And these are called flower head pins. You can see why, because they've got flowers on the end of them. So that's just going to hold everything in place. Another thing that you could have used if you don't want to use pins are fabric clips, which look like this. And these clip around the edge of all of the pieces of fabric to hold them all together. But I'll use pins for this. Now then, first of all we're going to use a running stitch and we're going to sew all the way around the edge. And you want to keep that stitch quite small, because the smaller your stitch, the stronger the seam is going to be. So come in about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Oops, my thread's come undone. That happens. So we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch from the edge all the way around the edge. And then we're going to finish off the seam with an over edge stitch. So go in and out. Keep the stitches quite small. If you wanted to, you could draw a line all the way around and then sew along the line if you find that easier. And it doesn't matter what you draw the line with. You could use a pencil or a crayon or even a biro. So very carefully trying to keep that line straight into that corner. Remember, I'm sewing through all of the fabric all together. If you're very clever, you can go in and out and in and out and in and out and put all of those stitches on your needle at the same time. But the fabric is quite thick, so you really have to push the needle through. And remember to keep those stitches as small as you can make them and keep them nice and even as well. So you can see how I've done that. So in and out. And you're going to carry on doing this all the way around. Now we're coming back to the beginning again. Do you remember how to tie a knot? So let's go in and out for the last couple of stitches. And to tie my knot, see all this thread, it's fraying all over the place. You go in and out, but don't pull the needle through. And then we're going to go round the needle with the thread, 1, 2, 3, 4, like a little French knot, and pull that through. And then we'll cut it off. Now we still need to do something about those raw edges that are fraying. So I'm going to tie another knot in my thread. And there are two ways you can do this. You can do an over edge stitch. So where my line of stitches is here, I'm going to go that side of them. So between your stitches and the edge of your fabric, that's called the seam allowance. So my seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch. If you're dressmaking, your seam allowance may be 5/8 of an inch or 1/2 inch. But for this one, the seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch. and I'm sewing in the seam allowance. And I'm going to go over and over, just like we did with the little mouse when we made him out of felt. Don't pull it too tight, and you can go all the way around. Now this is going to help to stop that fabric from fraying, which means that it's going to last longer and it's going to look neater. And I could probably put this in the washing machine without it all falling to pieces. So I'll finish that later, but I wanted to show you one other thing that you can do. So let me just tie this off here. So in the same way, so push the needle through, but don't do it all the way. And just 2 or 3 or 4 times around, it doesn't matter. And we'll cut that off. Put your needle somewhere safe so it doesn't drop on the floor because you don't want to tread on it. These are pinking shears. And these have a zigzag. So like with your scissors, they're straight and they have a flat blade here which is sharp. These have zigzags, which means that when you're cutting fabric, it cuts it with a zigzag. So you might have used those on paper before. But a zigzag cut is very clever because it looks nice on felt and you can just leave it like that. But when you use these on cotton fabric, it stops the cotton from fraying. So this side will fray, but when you use pinking shears, it doesn't fray. So I can either finish off all of my seams by going over and over and over, or I can trim down the very edges of my fabric with the pinking shears. Be very careful not to cut through your stitches if you're going to use these. Or you could have used these to cut out your fabric first of all. But not everybody has pinking shears. So if you don't, then sew over and over and over and over and do that all the way around until you're finished. Right, let's move this out of the way. Then we're going to turn all of this the right side up. So at the moment it's inside out. So I'm going to very carefully put my fingers inside here and push out all of those 4 corners. So it'll still look the same with all of these folded bits, but you don't see the raw edges. Now if you have something like a pen or a pencil that's not very sharp, you can push that into the corner, not too hard because we don't want to come through the stitches, but just gently ease those out. If there are any knitting needles around, you could use a knitting needle, or something like a skewer or a chopstick would work very well as well. So I need to iron that, but that's finished, and I can open this up enough to pop my tissues inside. Like that. So that looks a lot prettier, doesn't it, than just having a plastic tissue cover in my bag. And that's something that you could make as a present as well. So if you're looking for something very small to make, to give to one of your friends or one of your members of family that doesn't cost very much to make, then that's a really good idea. And then you can say, I made that for you, and they're really going to appreciate it. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you're going to make lots and lots of these pouches, and I hope you've learnt something about raw edges, finishing seams, seam allowances, and the difference between cotton and with felt. I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.